there's a chapter in the book that was written entirely the week after Donald Trump was elected in 2016. In many ways, it was cathartic for me to process through many of those emotions in the wake of that election. And um, what I say in that chapter and how I felt in that moment was that I don't know how much hatred Donald Trump inspired, but he certainly unmasked a lot that was pre-existing. He gave voice to just clear racial anxieties that exist for a much broader swath of the American populace than I think many of us knew in 2020. I think that effect, that unmasking effect, that revealing of racism, um, continued on throughout his 4 years, and we continued to see just how deeply ingrained those racial anxieties, that racism is in the just in the fabric of America. I mean, like it is a part of America, and so much of our history, and so for those reasons, I think that now that we have seen the depths of that hatred, and now that we've seen that despite an abject failure of 4 years, he's still able to garner whatever he'll end up with, 48% or something of the American vote. I'm left not wholly optimistic in this moment, despite the fact that I'm super encouraged by the election of Biden. Of course, obviously, with Kamala by his side. I look at what we've all collectively gone through these last 4 years, and I think to myself that it's going to take a lot of time to heal these scars. I'm also aware that Trump, just because he has been voted out of office, is not going to ride off into the sunset. I think that Trumpism and Trump as the figurehead of Trumpism will exist for many years into the future, and I am concerned about the damage that he can continue to bring upon our system when he's not unencumbered by a bureaucracy that would hold him back. So I'm concerned. In summation, I am deeply concerned.
Where were you on the path to finding your Blackness in a white world when Trump was elected?
I think if you had asked me in that moment, I probably would have told you that I was pretty far down that path. I probably would have told you that I had completed that journey. In fact, this book I started when I was a junior at Georgetown. I just released this past September. So it took me 4 full years to complete. And I think in some ways it was actually like, the book is about the journey, but the book also inspired the journey. The book charts the journey in real time as well. And the Trump chapter does not come at the end of that journey. There's still been a few key events. I mean, there's been key moments during his presidency where, again, we just saw like how ugly things can get. And that was still shocking to me, even at age 22, when I considered myself a skeptic. So I was far along, but not quite all the way there.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I can only imagine all of us thought we were a little bit further along, because after all, we did have first Black president. That happened.
Yeah.
And Black folk didn't elect him on our own. Right. That's what's been jarring to me. I mean, historically not jarring, because it's the same thing that happened right after Reconstruction. The white lash,
right?
Sharp white lash back in the just unfettered racism. But this ain't Reconstruction. It's ain't 1860s.
Yeah.
So I think your point is well taken. Even with all the skepticism we're bound to have as Black folk, this thing just took us for a loop.
Right. Yeah, and I think that going into, I think many of us really learned that lesson. I think that going into election 2020, you heard from people how reticent they were to even acknowledge the possibility of Biden winning. I mean, like you talked to people a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago, and it's like, despite the fact that the polls, which we now know, of course, were not we're not right. But despite the fact that the polls were saying that this was going to be, the blue tsunami, you talk to people and they're not even willing to acknowledge that as a possibility. They're saying, Trump's going to do it again. They're now doubling down and betting on um, racism in America. And frankly, like, even though Biden did win, I'm not sure that that thesis was disproven. I mean, like it was close enough that 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 racism is still a safe bet. Like it was close enough that if you're betting on a demagogue that will demean me and my kind, you're within the margin, and that's an ugly side of our country.
What would you say, Cole, to those who now want to find their own blackness in post-Trump, hopefully post-Trump, white
Right.
America?
Right. Man, that's interesting. I think that so there's a part of it that was not um there's a part of it that was out of my control. There are key events, and there's key events in any person's life that are out of their control, but are formative. The Trump election was one, and the killing of Trayvon Martin was another. Um, I think time will show me that the murder of George Floyd was another. There's these key events that spur change in one, right? But then I think there were some things that are self-starting, or at least had been handed down to me, that made a real difference as well. My parents forced me, and I write about this in the book. My parents forced me when young to read all sorts of stuff that no other 8-year-old was reading. Autobiography of Malcolm X, Black Boy, Native Son, Go Tell It on the Mountain, all of the canon of Black literature that tells our stories authentically, that I was not shown in schooling. Um, that was significant for me. That changed how I viewed myself and how I viewed my people. And in terms of things that are, that within one's control, I think educating, yourself about our own history is an important factor.
Yeah, and we all must do that. What's the atmosphere like in Sydney in terms of race relations and you being an African American in Sydney? What's that like?
Yeah. Yeah, there's no black people in Sydney. Like
Right.
like point blank. Like there's just not many black people. In Sydney and Australia writ large. And in fact, even that term black is used differently here. If you were to speak about a black person in an Australian context, you're typically talking about an indigenous person rather than an African or African American. Um, I so it's been a really interesting time to be here. There was a massive Black Lives Matter protest in the wake of George Floyd's murder, and I was out there. I'd never been around so many white people telling me my life mattered. It was
Yeah.
just a whole lot of white people shouting about BLM. Um, so there have been at times, like deeply isolating moments, particularly in the wake of George Floyd. Um, not feeling as though I was, close enough to my community, sort of grappling with that. Uh, that said, Australia does have its own deeply problematic, troubling, abusive history with Indigenous and Aboriginal people here. Um, and it's interesting because I'm in the media quite a bit here now, and am often asked, my opinion on those issues, and I have to remind people that I just got here 8 months ago. And this is an issue that is centuries long, and I think people often assume that I would have some insight into the plight of Indigenous people here because of my status as an African American. It's just simply not the case. So it has its own troubling history, is my point. Um, Divorced from ours.
Yeah. So I asked you how far along you were. Lastly, where are you today? Where do you feel you are on this quest to find your blackness in this white world?
Yeah. I think I'm pretty good. I think I'm comfortable. I mean, what so much of the book is about It's about being uncomfortable. It's about being in these spaces, whether they be black or white, and not feeling as though I fit snugly. Um, because of the ways in which I differ from, whatever crowd I'm amongst. And I don't get that anymore. I mean, I think Georgetown took me a long way down that path, actually. Um, I feel good about, I can do something like move to Sydney, Australia, and acknowledge the pros with the cons and leave here with a pretty fantastic experience. I feel that way about many of the spaces I enter at home, as well. Those reflections should come with the caveat that uh, there was a time when I would have said that before, and then Trump was elected. So I guess in some sense, who knows? But I do think I've come pretty long way on that journey, and like where I've landed. And the book charts that journey, both in myself and in others.